Cattlemen are an independent breed and often bristle when faced with mandates from the federal government. That's why many were relieved when USDA abandoned their national animal ID system and put the power in the state's hands.
With technology nowadays, we think that the states can work together and then they can feed it forward, and we can take it from the state to the federal, and that's a better plan than having it jammed down our throat from the federal regulators.
Another advantage of a state-run program is there are already many ID programs in place, including Bang's vaccination tags. And with USDA allowing a variety of ID methods, that should lower the cost.
We individually identify our home-raised cattle through tags, tattoos. There's a number of ways you can do it. Branding, I guess, is a way. But we also use the EID tag.
Under the state system, livestock only need to be ID'd if they're moving across state lines for commerce, which shifts the burden to livestock markets. However, that increases concern the program will move away from a voluntary approach cattlemen want.
I mean, when you look at the details here, even though they don't come out and say mandatory, when you're talking about crossing state lines, that's going to end up being a de facto mandatory system.
An Iowa state president also sees a lack of uniformity with the state-run system, which may impede trade.
I have a real fear we could come up with a number of different programs and really affect interstate commerce.
As a result, they've been working with the Iowa State vet on their plan.
A plan where we can incorporate as many states around us, particularly the states that we import cattle from, so that we can get some kind of a system that we can all work with.
To achieve that, USDA has also been gathering input from the various industry stakeholders the last several months.
We expect a proposed rule probably sometime late this spring. At that point in time, we really know what kind of mechanics USDA is talking about. We'll have the opportunity at that point in time to comment on those rules, to go in and try to make some changes. That way, whatever is put in place is workable.
The key to developing a livestock identification system is to be able to still have 48-hour traceback of diseases, especially for our foreign customers.
Our consumers over there are starting to demand it, and we just don't have enough product that is traceable in the U.S., and hopefully we can get that turned around, because that is a huge part of whether they buy our product or not.
And Miller says he's concerned the U.S. needs to be a leader in traceability or lose its competitive edge in the meat export market.
We are the only major exporting meat company or country in the world that don't have mandatory traceability.
As we look around the world, we're seeing our major competition, Australia, for example, talking about traceability you can trust. We're seeing in Korea where they've instituted total traceability. We have it with Europe.
Because of that and current disease outbreaks like FMD in South Korea, NCBA's immediate past president says they may need to rethink their policy on ID.
We've always been about a voluntary program. It's probably time for us to revisit that, because I think if we want to be truly competitive in a worldwide market, we're going to have to understand that we need to be able to trace those disease issues back.
And while beef exports have returned to pre-BSE levels, he believes the lack of a mandatory livestock traceback system may be a limiting factor for future export growth.
If we had it, what's the question? I mean, that's a question that you can ask all the time. Where could we be if we had traceability?
I'm Michelle Rook reporting for Ag Day.
Thanks, Michelle. As far as funding the ID system, USDA says it intends to provide funding to the states along with guidelines and a computer information system. However, whether it's enforced will depend on whether Congress funds it. And we're keeping with the theme of animal ID, not necessarily for disease traceback, but for the prevention of cattle theft. With cattle prices high and families struggling economically, conditions are ripe for thieves to target livestock. LSU Ag Center beef specialist Alan Nipper says losing a few head could cancel much of a year's profits for small producers. He says small producers are often targeted since they don't typically invest in surveillance equipment. Nipper recommends a permanent ID on livestock. He also says producers should vary the time and location of feeding. This makes it harder on thieves to know when farmers will be around. And USDA's annual report on red meat production shows a slight decline in beef and pork production in 2010. The Ag Department says total red meat production hit just over 49 million pounds. Analysts say cattle and hog producers trimmed their herds because of persistent losses in 2007 to 2009. With corn sitting above $7, analysts say producers will be reluctant to increase their herd size significantly. And you can get updates on the beef industry, including market and production information, at beeftoday.com.